It's been 412, back with the wine of the month. You know, we're coming off of our Spanish red wine values video, being our #1 watch video on YouTube at this point. And so I thought we'd jump back into Spain because I really do believe in the value that you get out of this country. And if you're from Pennsylvania, pay attention. The wine I'm bringing you is available for a crazy $15.99, and it's really, really something you're going to want to try, and you're probably going to want to go out and buy a case of. So the area we're going to focus on is Rioja. Rioja is in the northern part of Spain, kind of in the center, just below Basque Country. And it's a continental climate, so it's fairly far inland, right? Long, hot summers, cold winters, pretty harsh winters. But it's kind of a meeting, if you will, of two different climates. The Atlantic climate off of Galicia with those cooler breezes and cooler weather, and that warmer, hotter Mediterranean climate coming out of the south. Now, Rioja has a long history of making wine. In fact, there's evidence that the Phoenicians were making wine here as early as 4000 BC. The Islamic Moors came in and invaded Spain and prohibited alcohol, and so the industry really kind of dropped off, and then came back in the Middle Ages with the monks producing wines for liturgical purposes. And then really the critical part of history here in terms of winemaking is the phylloxera pest that invaded France first. And the Bordeaux winemakers at the time came to this part of Spain looking for new territory, new lands to plant vines and export back to France. So that's really kind of what put this back on the map. Now through the 19th century, the 20th century, Spain got invaded by phylloxera on its own. Things were replanted, and there's been a new focus on quality now. And so I think the wines coming out of Spain today are better than ever. So when we talk about Rioja, there's a couple terms that you need to know in a bottle. First thing you might see is Vino Joven or Robla. Now these are young wines that typically don't see much, if any, oak. If they do, it's less than a year in barrel. They're meant to, fresh, fruity, meant to be drank fairly young. The step up from that is the crianzas. Okay, crianzas have an aging requirement of 2 years total. A minimum of 1 year must be in oak and a year in bottle. And the whites have a 2-year requirement as well, but the whites have a little bit less time in barrel, I think 6 months in barrel. So we'll stick with the reds. So from crianza, then you go up to the reserva. And reserva has a 3-year total requirement, still just 1 year in oak minimum, and a minimum overall requirement of 3 years total. So typically 1 year in bottle and then up to, or 1 year in oak, 2 years in bottle plus. And then there's the final tier, which is Gran Reserva, and that's what we're going to drink here today. Gran Reserva has a 5-year aging requirement, okay? 2 years of which must be in oak, and 2 years minimum in bottle, but it requires 5 years overall aging. Now this is the Carlos Ceres Gran Reserva 2010 Rioja. So this was just released fairly recently, and again, it's a 2010, so we're talking 10 years of age here. 36 months in barrel, 36 months in bottle, and then released. 2010 may go down as one of the vintages of the century in Rioja as well. Very good vintage. This winery was started in the late 1800s by a Frenchman, Charles, went by Carlos Ceres in Spain. And he was one of those guys from Bordeaux that came here to set up a wine industry because of the phylloxera outbreak in Bordeaux. Started in 1896, been around for well over 100 years now, and putting out some really great wines. So this blend is 85% Tempranillo, 10% Graciano, and 5% Mezzuelo or Carignan. Again, it's fermented all in concrete and then brought up 36 months in a combination of American and French oak, and then aged another 36 months in bottle. Now the site on this is bright garnet, completely translucent, just a little bit of bricking at the edge, but not too much considering the age of the wine. Give it a smell. Yeah, and you totally get that dustiness, that the odor, the earthy elements. It's not quite as fruity as a young wine. It's got some spice, some baking spice, maybe some cinnamon. Tons of vanilla, but not like an over oaky California cab vanilla. It's just like this kind of very subdued, kind of creamy vanilla smell. And mocha, some chocolatey notes, and just really dusty. Dusty cherry is the best way I can explain this, the nose on this wine. Let's give it a sip. Yeah, those still fairly tannic actually, but layers of flavor here. That dusty kind of old cherry, and leathery notes and earthy notes are definitely coming through. Maybe creeping a little bit more towards the plum, but definitely still I'm getting more of the dusty cherry, more of the red fruit than the darker fruits. There's some spices in this, some baking spices I said. Maybe even a touch of kind of like a touch of coconut or something along those lines, but just a tremendous bottle of wine. So if you live in Pennsylvania, for $15.99, definitely go buy a bottle of this. And even if you don't, you can probably find this for under $25. It's an incredible introduction to Rioja. It's an incredible introduction to a wine that has a sense of place and a wine that has been aged extremely long before being released to really give you an idea of what happens with red wines as they take on age and lose some of that fresh and vibrant fruit and pick up some of those secondary earthy characteristics. I think you'll really enjoy this one. So as we say at Bin 412, here's to drinking new regions, expanding your palate, drinking new varietals. Cheers.